how to strike the balance in your business so that you can spend as much time with your family as possible and keep your priorities your priorities. Today on Brand Tales.
Brand Tales, all your brand tales. Listen to how the greatest brands came to be.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Brand Tales. This is your host, Holly Chantel, the founder of The Land of Brand. And today I have an awesome person to introduce you to. Her name is Shawn Driscoll, and she is a trailblazing entrepreneur if there ever was one. Her website is actually all about trailblazing, so I would hope so. Shawn really knows how to break out of the cookie cutter mold, and she does not do what everyone expects you to do. She does what feels right in her gut, and she is just a fantastic example for all of us in really what it means to trust your gut and what it means to build a business around your own strengths and what your priorities are. So she has corporate experience consulting. She has built a six-figure business. She's been in the coaching industry for more than 10 years. So she knows how to walk the talk, and she knows how to build a successful business. And I just absolutely love her. So I am so excited to introduce her to you. And let's go ahead and get started.
Thank you so much for coming, Shawn. I am really looking forward to exploring your brand tale.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
All right. So you're probably one of my favorite entrepreneurs because we have so much in common as far as like the stepping out of the box and the cookie cutter, and you have like these really strong opinions that you are not afraid of sharing, and you attract like the most amazing people to you because of that. So I just want to applaud you for being a great example to all of us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so I'm curious, because you have been such a trailblazer, what that moment was that you decided to start your own business. Like, were you in a corporate career before now?
Yeah, so for me, it wasn't exactly a moment, but it was an evolution. So I had a corporate career that honestly I loved, and I couldn't envision never not being in corporate. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, and so you know how you want to be the maverick, right? So for me, the maverick thing to do was to go corporate, right? Because everybody else was like, my grandparents owned a grocery store, my mom owned a craft business, my aunt owned a restaurant. Like everybody was very, self-sufficient, entrepreneurial. And I was like, I'm going to go corporate, like, I don't ever want to
stick it to the man and go work for him.
I don't ever want to own my own business. That looks like terrible life. Like I really thought that. And so I got my degree and I went to work for the utility company here in Michigan and in human resources. And I actually really loved it. And then several years later, I finished my master's degree and I went into consulting with a top 5 consulting firm and was doing a lot of like automotive related consulting. I live in Detroit, Motor City. So there's a lot of opportunity here, especially back then for automotive consulting. And I really liked it. It was pretty high action. You got to do new stuff all the time. My maverick sort of trailblazer, not fitting in thing worked really well in that setting. Mm-hmm. People valued the outside the box stuff that I would want to do. And then I got pregnant with my son and had him and went back to work part-time. So I did like a 3 10-hour day kind of schedule, mm-hmm. which, was okay for a while. But then our company got bought by another company, and they basically said no more flex time, no more part-time stuff, and also no more just staying local, because 99% of the people that I worked with at this company traveled all over. And I had gotten super lucky because I kind of got in with the automotive people, and automotive is here. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have to travel hardly ever. I traveled a little, but not like everybody else. And they basically said, no, you're going to travel, and so I said, oh, no, I'm going to quit. So I put in my notice really without a plan. My vision, like the thing that I sold my husband on, was I'm going to quit and I'm going to try to get a job teaching like at a college. And I actually did accomplish that. So I, put in my notice. I started putting in applications at colleges, and I was hired to teach as an adjunct faculty member. But even before the semester, because I quit like at the end of June. My son was just turning 1, and I thought I'll have the summer to get a job before fall starts, right before classes start. But 2 days after I put in my notice, one of the clients I had formerly worked with through this company heard through the grapevine I had resigned and called me and said, we're having breakfast because I need you. So I met him for breakfast and he's like, you're going to come and you're going to consult and coach my team. And I was like, no, I'm going to teach. That's my plan, And he's like, do you have a teaching job yet? And I'm like, well, no, but, I'm going to. And he's like, yeah, well, I'm offering you. So basically his negotiation was name your price, name your hours, write your contract. I will sign it. So I go home.
So
I tell
really
my
good negotiator.
So totally, right? So I go home and my husband's like, of course you're doing that. Like, why wouldn't you do that? You don't really have a plan. So I did it. And then I also got hired to teach. So I was doing both of those things. And it was kind of in that experience where I was like, I could actually do my own thing. This works pretty cool. Like I set my rate, I set my hours, it works for my family. And then I also ended up pregnant with number 2. So then that was really forming in my mind, like now what, right? Because, I've got another one coming that was slightly unplanned. Super welcome, not sort of scheduled in. So,
Not in the plan.
yeah, she wasn't in my schedule, let me just say. And that has held true for this child ever since. Like her schedule and my schedule never align. So, so anyway, that was kind of where I got the seed planted. And that also, when I was doing corporate work, I was doing coaching. And I was really interested in executive coaching. So after my second child was born, I left the consulting job I had been doing because I helped them hire a replacement since I knew I was leaving to have a baby. I kept teaching and picked up some other odd consulting jobs, but threw myself kind of into coach training and put up my shingle as a coach after she was born. So that's kind of the evolution of how it happened. But it was really a family oriented thing that drove the whole thing, right?
That's funny. And it's funny because I've been doing, a lot of these interviews and I hear a few common themes. And one of them is a lot of people come from families of entrepreneurs, but usually that pushes them into becoming an entrepreneur, not away from it.
Push me away from it. Right.
And then the having the kids and how that really just totally changes your whole dynamic. And I've experienced the same thing and everything's changed. And now I'm waiting for number 2 and I'm trying to figure out how do I make this new dynamic work? So yeah, and so tell us about the Trailblazing Quotient, because that is just, to me, is just such an awesome tool.
Yeah, so super quick, it's an assessment tool and kind of a philosophy/structure that I developed to help people understand their options for how to design and structure a business, especially a service-based business that wants to do something a little innovative or different. And to also help them know what they're more wired to do. Because there's a lot of information in the marketplace that's like, no, this is the way to make a lot of money. No, this is this path to 6 or 7 figures. No, do it this way, right? Like there's so much competing and conflicting advice.
Right.
And I found I struggled with figuring out how to navigate that. Mm-hmm. And then I started seeing my clients struggling with how to navigate that and really getting lost. And so I developed this process to give them a way to very quickly decide what direction is a better fit for them.
And I'm curious how the idea came about to create this process, and then how you actually were able to gather the 4 different kind of types of entrepreneurs.
Right. So that also, so it's a little bit of an evolution of story too, as most things are, right? It started first with myself, where I was trying to figure out, I got into coaching. I kind of was leaving some of the consulting work behind because, has its own demands. And I had a infant and a toddler and, so I needed something that was maybe more home-based for me than going into corporate and doing long-term projects. So I was like, all right, let me figure this out. So I first did the typical coaching model, X number of dollars for X number of sessions a month. Mm-hmm. And then, thank goodness, I can do basic math and I figured out super quick that wow, you can't make any money this way.
Right.
You can make a little bit of money this way, but you can't make a living this way. The numbers don't add up, And so I started just looking around, who's making it, in this space. And mind you, this was 12, 13 years ago.
Right.
Coaching, especially where I'm at in Detroit, was super new. There were probably 5 coaches in Michigan at that time, right? Like it wasn't here. And so I had to look elsewhere. So I started looking around who's really making it in the space. And I started kind of categorizing and noticing the different ways people were operating, the different styles. So that was kind of my initial noticing that there were different approaches and different pathways. I still didn't, though, know how to pick for me. And also, I was realizing actually none of what I'm seeing would work for me. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, this person's great and their model's great, except that it requires a ton of travel and live events and blah, blah, blah. And I can't do that.
Right.
Oh, this person's great, but it requires a lot of technology and blah, blah, blah. And I suck at technology, so there were reasons why things didn't seem like they were fit. So I was still trying to figure out myself. Then I started coaching more and more entrepreneurs and realizing they had the same questions. And I have a pattern seeking mind. Like I can't explain it. It's actually one of we'll talk about this later, my superpower, right? Is like I see things that really seem intangible, but they form a picture in my brain. So I started seeing with clients, like they'd be talking and I'd start to get a picture in my head of like, oh, you should organize it like this and this is what it looks like. But I'd also hear them say, like, I'm trying this, like I'm doing so-and-so's model. And I'd think immediately, that's never going to work for you. And here's why. And I would articulate it. Like, this is why that's never going to work for you. Blah, 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 blah. And I probably had probably back around 2010, I remember this was like the hit upside the head year where I realized I needed to create it into a structured tool because I had probably 5 different people in a very condensed amount of time say to me, are you teaching this? Why aren't you teaching this? You should be teaching this. People need to know this. And I was like, oh, I probably should be teaching this, So then I sat down and tried to start articulating it. And that's where the 4 quadrants came from and, started organizing the models I'd seen and what was happening for clients and, where the conflicts were and the traps they were falling into and developed it into an assessment that I betaed and then ultimately finished up and turned into something people can use.
Right. And for those of you that don't know, this assessment that Shawn has really, it helps you categorize like what type of entrepreneur you want to be, and then she coaches you around that on what kind of business model you should have, how you should be marketing yourself, like how do you build a business as this type, and then what challenges might you face, what shouldn't you do, and it's just so right on. Like I don't think now that I know what mine are, I'm innovation intimacy.
Right.
It took me. I'll start with I, and it always gets me.
Sorry.
Innovation and
I
intimacy.
have a problem with alliteration. It's a little bit of an addiction.
Oh, I do the same thing. I use P for everything. I swear, I can find anything that'll start with P. I don't know why. But yeah, so knowing, innovation intimacy helps me make business decisions and know whether or not I should be doing this offer or that offer, why I keep running up against a wall when I try to do this. So definitely check that out if you haven't already at shawndriscoll.com. I'm sure you'll probably talk about this later.
No, it's perfect. They can go grab it.
So you can actually take the assessment for free, and it'll give you information about what type of entrepreneur you are and what that means. So definitely check that out. So kind of going back to your business. So what do you wish you had known when you started your coaching business? Like what advice would you give yourself if you were to start over?
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, I'm not super great at looking back and being regretful, so which I guess is a good trait. But I would say, like for me, I was always in the early days too slow to trust myself. Thinking like, oh, this is new to me and I don't know enough and I need to learn from other people, and it would distract me sometimes from doing what felt like the right thing. And so I think I would tell myself, trust myself sooner and trust myself more fully, right? Like it's fine to want to go out and learn something new and learn from somebody, but you still have to be able to validate it and discern it against you and not trade in your own self-judgment and self-trust for theirs.
Right. I love that. That's probably one of the biggest pieces or the most common pieces of advice I give my clients is like, stop overthinking it. Like what feels right to you? Like what do you want to do?
It's, awesome. The self-doubt can slow you way down.
Right.
Right. So
that was kind of like your challenge starting out, but tell me what, you said you have a superpower. Tell me about your superpowers. What are you like amazing at?
Well, so part of my superpower is hard to articulate, but it's like the I see things, right? So I can see how to make something that feels really intangible or seems really intangible tangible.
Hmm.
Um, I've always done that, like even in my corporate life, like I did a lot of work in consulting and in my HR career on a lot of the intangible elements of employee satisfaction and leadership. And I always had a way to like make it tangible to people who normally would think we don't need this soft skills BS, right?
Hmm.
Um, and then when I got into coaching, I started noticing, like I mentioned, like, oh, I get a picture in my head for somebody. It's like it just pops up and I have to draw it out and, send it over. Like, here's what I'm seeing for you, or here's how these things connect. And it just allows people to stop struggling so much when you can take something that they can't quite grab. It feels like
Hmm.
somebody described it as like, catching moonbeams in a jar, right?
Right.
Like I can take it and make it real.
Right.
And so that's one of the superpowers I would say is like my sight. I don't know, sixth sense.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that.
We
Um,
joke that I see business models. My clients are like, like the kid from the Sixth
yeah,
Sense,
I
who
see.
saw dead people. Like
I
I
see
don't
this.
see dead people, but I see business models, which is kind of weird.
That's awesome. And you
Dead people
mentioned
see.
something about patterns. How does that fit in?
Well, yeah, I see like how things connect.
Hmm.
So someone will come to me and say, I just was doing this week because with one of my groups, and they're like, oh, I have this market and this interest and that interest, and none of it makes sense together, right? And I see the connection or the
Yeah.
pattern between them
I
like
love when
pretty
that happens.
quickly,
Like someone says, like, all
quickly.
these things, they sound like, it's just
On
a
the
pile of stuff.
surface.
And you're like, no,
Don't
like,
look like they
this
go
all,
together at all, right? But then I'm
right,
like, oh no, this goes with this,
right,
and here's what that says, and they're like, what?
right.
Um, Never saw it that way before. So it's just how my mind is an organizing mind.
Hmm.
I don't know, I used to think that was a liability. So actually, that's the other thing I would say from my advice piece is when I first got into coaching, I felt like my process and my patterns and my pictures were not coach like.
Hmm.
I felt like they were a liability actually in coaching. Like every other coach I met was so different than me,
Hmm.
that I thought I almost didn't fit in and it was a liability. And I tried for a while to hide it because I got some pushback from a couple higher level mentors that were like, oh, you're too corporate or you're too processy. And, coaching isn't processy. Um, and it took me a while to embrace that, like, oh, that's bullshit. And,
I feel like anytime's telling you, like, you're doing it wrong. Like, they don't really know what
totally,
they're talking about.
right?
They're,
Like it
they're
took
not
me
your
a while to
coach.
go, oh, that's kind of bullshit.
Right.
And well, they were my coach, which made it worse actually in a way. Like they were just somebody who felt like they needed to share their opinion.
Right.
So even worse, unsolicited opinion taking, sweet. Um, so I think just learning to not see ourselves as the liabilities because those are usually the strengths and the assets that we bring are the very things that we're like, oh, that's a liability. I kind of need to keep that in the closet, which is
Right.
why I think clients were pushing on me, before I
Sure.
launched the TQ of like, why aren't you teaching this? I was kind of just doing it in the closet with them, like, oh no, look here, let me show you. They're like, why
Right.
aren't you just doing this? This is brilliant. Nobody's doing this.
Right.
Right. So we all have something like that, I think, that we think is the liability about ourselves.
Yeah, that's true. It's like it's liability, but it's probably the thing people relate to you the
It's the big
most, or,
ask,
it's those
probably.
quirks. Like I always tell people, if someone's making fun of you about something or they keep like bring it up, it's usually something they find endearing or they like, and you probably should do more of it.
Right. Instead of like, tuck it away.
Right, instead of being embarrassed by it or hiding
Right.
it. So, how do you balance your business with family?
I'm a ninja at this. I'm just going to claim that because I've grown this business, from the very early days of infants and toddlers. And I also had to grow it when my kids were 2 and 4. I became guardian of my mom
Hmm.
because she had a brain aneurysm that ruptured and left her disabled. And she just passed away last year, but I managed her life really for 10 years. I was her guardian and conservator and caregiver and, advocate and everything for 10 years while raising 2 and 4-year-old, right?
Wow,
All the way up to teens,
you are a ninja.
right? And growing the business, right? And
Right.
hopefully being a
That's a
decent
lot
wife,
for one person.
hopefully being a good wife and, friend and whatever. Sometimes falling down on some of those other parts. Um, and so I balance it by, first of all, in some ways, having those kind of life constraints, and being clear, right? Being clear that those are the number one priority. Because I think it starts there. Like, you got to be certain. And I knew what my non-negotiables were from the get-go. Like, I left a 6-figure corporate job to be with these kids, so I'm going to be with these kids, right? I'm not going to negotiate on that after I walked away from something that I actually loved, right? I didn't walk away because I hated it. I walked away because it didn't work for my life. So I wasn't going to recreate a situation that didn't work for my life on my own, right? Why would I do that? So I was super clear about my non-negotiables, which over the years has been simple things like I'm only going to work 15 hours a week, or I'm only going to work 20, you know, and as they get older, it's gone up to maybe 25, but I still don't work any more than 25 to 30. It's just not available to me. I pick them up at 3 and I'm done, right? Because then I'm running them wherever they have to go. Because now, as in addition, now that they're teenagers, I'm a chauffeur. So, you know, they have a lot of places to be, which doesn't happen when they're little. So they have busy social lives and activities, right? So, you know, and then I was super clear when my mom became ill that I was going to be there, right? I had no idea it was going to be a 10-year marathon, but I didn't know what it was going to be, right? So I had to make that a priority. And when you have that kind of container and that kind of clarity about your non-negotiables, it makes it easier to make choices that fit and to say, you know what, that might sound great and that might even be great for somebody else, but that doesn't fit my container, right? And probably the most difficult time I had with the balance was actually after my mom passed away, because I felt like the walls of the container fell away a little bit because all of a sudden it was 10 years later and I'm like, my mom is gone, so I don't have that daily thing. And my kids are now, you know, 13 and 15, and their needs for me have changed significantly in 10 years. And I almost was a little bit unmoored by not having that container for a few months. Like, oh, what do I do with this opening? I don't know. You know,
like everything's kind of turned upside down. You have to.
I was
like when you have your first kid.
Yeah, right. And just like, oh, I can create a different container now, like for this next stage of life. But it took me a while to come to that realization. And I felt like I kind of missed the structure that I was forced to have for so long. So I think just being super clear about what you will and won't do. It's the one thing people comment to me about all the time, you know, is like, they've watched me for 10 years, some people, right? Dealing with all of this. They're like, oh, you know, you're one of the best people I know at navigating that and still thriving.
Right. And do you have helpers or just you?
In the business, I have a VA. I always have had a VA from the beginning, of some level of support. It goes up and down depending, right? But yeah, always.
Okay. I'm just curious because I'm looking to kind of
Yeah,
scale.
for sure. You got to have that, right? I think you have to have somebody there. Like when I first started out, I found a woman on Craigslist. And I made a commitment to myself that I was going to take 10% of what I was earning and put it towards help always. So when I was earning $1,500 a month in the first year, I paid her $150 a month to do my newsletter and do some other stuff. And then as my revenue grew, my budget for team grew, and I then could add more technical pieces or, you know, higher level skills that maybe cost a little bit more. And so I still work to that standard all the time.
That's a really good rule of thumb, like the 10%,
just
because it does grow and scale with you as you go.
Right. And it just makes me stay true to like, I'm going to have help here.
Right. Good. Very cool. And just looking how we're doing on time. So what would you say is the number one thing that has contributed to getting to where you are now?
The number one thing. Stubbornness. Like, you know, I am not quitting. There have been times for sure where like the thought has crossed my mind, like, you know what, maybe I should just go get a job. Because I was pretty darn good at having a job, you know. It wasn't such a bad thing for me. I liked it. I was decent at it, you know. But really like just my stubborn refusal to like give in. Because once I commit to something, I'm like a dog with a bone. Like it's hard to get me off of it, right? So getting a job felt like quitting.
Right. Yeah.
You know, just felt like, okay, I'm throwing in the towel. And also it felt like stepping away from what I said was the most important thing, because getting a job, honestly, isn't going to give me the flexibility I needed for the family life I want to live.
Right.
just isn't going to work, right? Your 2 weeks vacation and your, 40-hour sick time just isn't going to cut it.
Yeah. That's the thing I have to remind myself when things get tough. It's like, well, I can take tomorrow off if I had to. Like
I
if the
take
kids are sick or, I don't have to
like
worry about
right.
the number of days and that kind of thing
And
because
and
it's
as your
all
kids get
movable.
older, you'll like it even becomes more important. I'll be honest, that flexibility, like, the school schedule comes and I immediately block out Easter, Christmas, Thanksgiving, spring break, winter break,
Right.
like all those weeks. I would never be able to take those off if I had a job. And then I go down to like half time in summer.
Yep.
So, from like mid-June to September, I'm working a fraction of my normal schedule. I also wouldn't be able to do that
Right.
if I had a job, right? So, the trade-offs just aren't worth it. So in those moments, I have to remind myself, like, no, a job would really actually suck.
Yeah,
A
this is
boss,
better.
40 hours, 2 weeks vacation at best, like, ugh.
Yeah. No, not for me.
Commuting,
Yeah, I know. That's a big one. It's really nice just to have to walk downstairs.
right? Like the commuting idea, that alone is like the deal breaker for
Yeah.
me. I
Or,
had to drive.
just having to dress from the waist up.
Right, that's awesome. I have like crappy jeans on right now,
Yeah,
right? You
exactly.
don't know.
Wearing my slippers.
I'm barefoot. It's all good.
So I have a couple questions that I ask everyone to kind of give us resources of what you like that they might be able to apply to their own business. So do you have any favorite business tools?
Oh, business tools. Um, business tools. I'm sure that I do. What do I like? My phone, right? Because I can sit outside, waiting for kids at dance and do 90% of my business from my phone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, so that's huge.
Do you have any
The,
pieces of software you use on a day-to-day basis?
I mean, I'm thinking like there's the obvious things, right? Like I love the WordPress blog because it's something that I, in my low technical skill level, can do things for myself in and not
Mm-hmm.
always have to be dependent on my VA.
Right.
Like I can go in and make a change. It makes me feel empowered, like I'm capable. I use like, Aweber and the shopping cart and PayPal. PayPal's awesome. Those kinds of things are awesome. I think probably everybody talks about that. Um, yeah, that's about it. I can't like, yeah, I'm a big fan though of my phone and my iPad.
All
I
right.
use those a lot because I'm on the go so much,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I same
Facebook.
thing.
I
I
mean, you
love
can't not
being
love
able to.
Facebook. Well, you cannot love Facebook. A lot of people don't love Facebook. But Facebook's also an awesome tool. I use it to run my groups, you know, great community building. So, even though my husband complains all the time about how Facebook is totally lurking in his life and invading all of his privacy, and he's going to give it up forever, like I love Facebook.
Well, he doesn't like you taking pictures and tagging him?
Oh, well, I did today because, we have a big football game coming up and he'll appreciate that because I put, a big MSU because here in the state we have our big rivalry game this weekend, Michigan State versus Michigan.
Oh.
So I tagged him in a Michigan State picture where we were at the Rose Bowl a couple years ago. So
Oh, awesome.
he'll be appreciative of that, but then he'll be complaining later, like when the sidebar starts advertising Michigan State close to him or something, because then he knows they're stalking him.
I know, that is so creepy.
Hates that. Don't stalk me.
Right. And do you have any guilty pleasures?
Probably my only guilty pleasure, well, okay, coffee and wine, but that just goes without saying when you're a parent.
Those aren't like guilty pleasures. Those are like necessities.
Essentials. Exactly. Life essentials, especially as a mother of teenagers. I'm like, coffee to wake up and tolerate your bad attitude in the morning, and wine to wind down to, whatever.
And tolerate your bad attitude in the evening.
Tolerate your bad attitude that you dealt all day. So, yeah. So, guilty pleasures. I love certain reality television, but not the trashy kind. Like that's very judgy, but I like the ones like Project Runway and The Voice and Top Chef and those kinds of things where people are doing their passion and you're really, seeing them try to.
Yeah,
do
those are the same kind that I watch. I can't watch the ones that are just like drama filled.
I can't watch the drama stuff.
Fighting,
I don't want drama. Like I'm trying to minimize my life's drama. So
they like literally stress me out.
I
I
can't do
think
it.
I think I'm just too much of an empathetic person. I start like feeling it.
You feel like all the like
Yeah.
cattiness and yeah, not fun. I've crafted a life without that for the most part, other than the fact that I live with teenagers. Um,
Who needs reality TV when you
I
have
don't need
teenagers?
reality TV. I have the teen drama, all the time. So,
And do you have any favorite business books or a favorite author?
um, I'm terrible at these. Do you have a favorite thing? I'm not a favorites person. But I do love Seth Godin. Anything he writes is awesome. I probably have almost everything he's written. And I follow his blog, and I really love his stuff because I feel like it's always current and sort of pushing the edge of where we are,
Mhm.
which I appreciate very much. Which is actually why I don't like to read things a lot of more than once. Um, I tend to be a new person, so once I've read something once, I'm done. I'm good.
Yeah.
I want the next new thing.
Yeah.
Sort of the trailblazer trigger, right? It's
Right.
a little bit of a trap, but it's also just how I'm wired. I don't watch movies twice. I don't do a lot of that twice, unless somebody forces me to, like my daughter forcing me to watch Frozen 5 times or, something like that. But Seth Godin, I will say there is the only other book that comes to mind at the immediate moment that is a book that I've pulled off the shelf. I might not read it through and through, but I pull it off the shelf every so often. Is The Big Leap, by Guy Hendricks. Because there are times where things just get tough and you feel like you're getting stuck, and
Mhm.
that book has some great insights around that.
Great. Yeah, I will definitely. I think I've heard of that book. I've heard of it a couple times actually. So I think it's one of those ones I'm gonna have to
Go check
jump
it
on
out.
Amazon and grab.
Yeah, it's a good book to have, and I put a lot on my Kindle, but I actually keep that book hard copy because I can just grab it off the shelf and flip to the section that I want to look at and then put it back on the shelf and not feel like I read all the way through it. I don't keep a lot of tangible books anymore. I'm more
Mhm.
Kindle, but there's a few, and that's Seth's books I keep, and I keep that one.
Awesome. And if you could be a fairy tale character, who or what would you be?
Well, I have fairy tale trauma because I wasn't allowed to watch fairy tales growing up. My mom didn't want to encourage like the magical thinking that your prince will come and save you with a kiss.
Mhm.
Um, so I didn't really get attached to the idea of fairy tales when I was young. Now my daughter, right, she's 13, but she did kind of, I let her, like I decided, well, that was kind of silly of my mother. So I let her, watch the Disney movies. Although interestingly, she also sort of outright rejects them as sexist and ridiculous. And
Good for
so
her.
the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree
Right.
around here. Um, but I did love The Wizard of Oz. And my favorite Wizard of Oz character is the Wicked Witch of the West, right? And so, like, she has flying monkeys and she's super evil, but then you kind of think, well, maybe she's not so evil. Maybe there's something you don't know about her. But she used to scare the bejesus out of me. I'd watch The Wizard of Oz every year. So this movie is the one exception to my I don't watch things twice. I watched it like it would be on like television, the big
Right.
event of the season when we were growing up. Everything's on demand now, but when I was growing up, it was like, ooh, the one time a year you can watch The Wizard of Oz, and it's like a big event. And I would be on the floor watching it until the witch came, and then I would jump up on the couch with my mom, like, oh my God, she's here. So I love her. And then my daughter and I went and saw I read Wicked.
Wicked. I was
I
gonna
read,
ask you if you
I read the book,
see
which
her.
made me love her more because it gives her a whole backstory
Right.
that's totally compassionate. And then we've been to see Wicked, and because my daughter's into theater, and so it's her favorite show. So it's made me love the Wicked Witch even more.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Plus,
and
who
who
doesn't
can
love
be
wild?
flying
I
monkeys?
was gonna say, who doesn't love flying monkeys?
And when I was in 4th grade in my tap class recital, we got to be the flying
Oh,
monkeys.
that sounds awesome.
4th grade flying monkey costume with like wings, and it was awesome.
Now I'm just picturing you as like this little girl.
To dig that photo out, I'm sure it's
Yes.
attractive.
That's awesome.
And like it was like a brown bodysuit jumper thing with
Mhm.
this is the 70s, right? So like the flared pant leg and the wings. Woo, it was hot.
Ooh, yes.
Yeah,
If you can find that picture, I would definitely not mind seeing it.
I'm sure.
Cool. So thank you so much for answering all of my questions. And tell us, how do we get in touch with you?
The best place to go is ShawnDriscoll.com, SHAWN. DRISCOLL.com. There's where you can grab the TQ. You can read my blog if you want to catch some articles. And otherwise, scope me out. There's a contact page if you have questions or, want to get a hold of me.
Yeah, and so Shawn is, if you go to her site, her newsletter is not one of the ones where you get like blasted all the time with like affiliate stuff and
I don't do affiliates. I don't do it.
she's very selective about the kind of emails she sends, and it's always really quality. So of all the lists I'm on, you're one of the ones that's like goes right into my main inbox, and I always read because it's always valuable, and you don't like overload me. So it's awesome.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks. I'm glad I don't get slotted into the junk mail folder.
Yeah, you're privileged. So thank you everyone for tuning into yet another brand tale. We had so much fun with Shawn today, and if you have anything, any feedback, or if you really like the show, you can go to iTunes and leave a review. Also, don't forget that we do these every week, and if you would like reminders of when they're coming out, you can subscribe at brandtalespodcast.com, Stitcher, or iTunes, and we send out the episode recaps and all the links that we mentioned to make sure that, if you weren't scribbling down notes, that everything's actually right there for you. So until next week, I hope you all have an awesome, awesome week, and we will talk soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks for having me.